His government was already under pressure for doing too little. Now the Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has been dealt yet another blow, with Sunni ministers walking out. They say he acts on his own. So is his government on life support? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm David Foster. It's yet another setback for the Iraqi Prime Minister's coalition. The country's largest Sunni bloc, the Iraqi Accordance Front, quit the Iraqi cabinet on Wednesday. And that move leaves only 2 Sunni ministers in the government. However, the 44 Sunni members of parliament will remain. The withdrawal leaves behind a government weakened by both infighting and the previous withdrawal of Shiite cleric Mukhtar al-Assad's political bloc in April. Yet despite the walkout, Mr Maliki said talks with the Sunni group will go on. Well, Iraq's Vice President Tariq al-Hashemi, part of the Sunni bloc, says the front is still open to negotiations and the front has several demands for Mr Maliki's coalition. It accuses them of failing to meet them. Among the demands, they say they want more say in decisions about security matters, the government to release prisoners currently being held without charge, and for Shia militias targeting Sunni Arabs to be disbanded. The Accordance Front had presented these demands to the Maliki government before and says its pullout is a response to the government's reaction to them.
The Iraqi Accordance Front has promised the Iraqi people to withdraw from the current government if it did not respond to the demands presented by the front 1 week ago. It has been obvious that the government is still adamant in its arrogant stand and is still insisting on closing all the doors of any reforms necessary to save Iraq.
Now, Mr al-Maliki's coalition government's been in office since May of 2006. Back then, it had Washington's close support. But Mr Maliki's found it hard to capitalise on the promises made at the start of his tenure, and the US has grown increasingly pessimistic about his ability to deliver. Let's take a look at a few of the crucial problems. Oil, critical to Iraq's economic future, yet an important oil law that was set to share revenues among communities has still to be passed. An easing of the de-Baathification process was also expected. Mr Maliki, a Shia, was to pass reforms allowing members of Saddam Hussein's Sunni-dominated party into the government. He was also to call elections to divide power in the provinces, but not one of these targets has been achieved. Mr Maliki is now falling out of favour as lack of progress in Iraq continues to foment frustrations in Washington. Iyad Alawi, the former Iraqi Prime Minister, recently gave reasons why he thought Mr Maliki's government is doomed to fail.
The government of Maliki is not going to be capable, is not going to be able, because it is built on the philosophy of sectarianism. So it's not going to be able to solve or address the problems of Iraq and solve the problems of the country and build a proper reconciliation and reconciliatory process in the country.
Well, joining our discussions today from Amman, the Jordan capital, Fareed Sabri, the spokesman of the Iraqi Islamic Party. In the American capital, Washington, D.C., Scott Bates, Vice President of the Center for National Policy. And in London, Hassan Attia, head of the Center of Iraqi Studies. And Mr. Attia, if I could start with you. Is this, in any sense now, a government of national unity?
Definitely, it's not. And even the idea of government of national unity was a concept put forward by Zalmay Khalilzadeh, the American ambassador to Iraq. And at the time, he's a promise to the Sunni bloc that join the government, and there are certain requirements you are asking for, like revision of the constitution, revision of the de-Baathification, the militia and other issue. These will be addressed, and actually even they were given timetable of 6 months. Within 6 months, the government should fulfill some of these promises. As a matter of fact, now after 15 months or 16 months, none of these benchmarks, which was called, were fulfilled. In this sense, now the consensus, which is basically a Sunni bloc, by withdrawing in this way, actually is weakening the government, and now they have to face the consequences.
But without,
by the way,
without national unity, without some kind of coalition of the disparate political forces within Iraq, can there be any kind of progress?
here is the point. National reconciliation was the key point to overpass the situation in Iraq. The fact that the government reflect a highly polarized parliament, and that was a mistake, maybe American mistake, by being too hasty, by rushing the constitution and rushing the election, and then once they have the constitution, they said now we'll start to amend it. Here now we are paying a price of this rushing things. But as you said, national unity cannot solve the problem based on sectarianism. Now the Sunni and the consensus group, they feel that they didn't deliver, they cannot satisfy the demand of their constituency, and they are in an awkward position that the Sunni area constituency start criticizing them, that you are enjoying the benefit of the green zone, you are having good salary, and you forgot about us. So they were in a very difficult position to continue in government because of the criticism. But what they have done, and was tactically clever one, that they unified their position. The Islamic party worked with the other, and the other party, other group, were not able to divide them. Now they are in a better position to negotiate. The question is, and they will start negotiating in a matter of 2 days with the Iraqi leadership. They will meet in Baghdad. What they have in concrete steps, what are their demands? And I will elaborate on this point.
Well, can I get? I'd like to go to one of our other guests. Maybe come back to that in just a moment, Mr. Attir. Let's talk to Farid Sabri, joining us from Amman, the spokesman of the Iraqi Islamic Party. With Muqtada al-Sadr's bloc out, with now the Sunni bloc out and all sense of any kind of coalition seemingly gone, is there any chance of this government actually surviving?
I think it will be very difficult. The problem, the only way this government continues to survive is with the support of the Americans and, of course, the support of the militias and the security forces. This is the only support the government is really. That's why it is continuing. You see, the government has got about 200,000 police officers. They have about 100,000 army officers. Most of them are associated with the militias, with ethnic cleansing, with the abuse of human rights of the Iraqis. So I think the government could survive as a dictatorship, as any other Arab government.
Well, which many people would not want to see, and I'm sure yourself included in that sense. But if there are to be elections, what would be the outcome of that in terms of security, which is, of course, uppermost in most people's minds?
I think if there is an elections, unless the elections is under the auspices of the United Nations and unless it is really a clear and out of corruption, I don't think Iraq will see any security, because the militias are in command and they could turn the result as what they've done before into the favor of the militias and those political parties that have militias. So I think unless the elections are fair and under the jurisdiction of an unbiased committee or like the international body, so otherwise I don't think I could see any light at the end of the tunnel.
Scott Bates, let's bring up something that the American Defense Secretary Robert Bates has said within the last few hours. He said that they underestimated the process, that it was a lot more difficult to get some kind of national unity than perhaps many Americans had thought. It's a bit late to be saying that. Shouldn't he have realized that a long time ago?
Well, you know, one would think so. It's quite stunning to believe that this would have been an easy process. I think the task before the Iraqi government is like trying to build an airplane while you're flying. It's very difficult, almost impossible. And under the circumstances with this kind of sectarian conflict, it's stunning for me to believe that American officials could not see the difficulty. It's not just cutting a deal. I mean, there's a certain basic level of trust and common purpose that needs to be established, which I think is lacking at this point.
And he's saying the depth of mistrust is far greater than many people had anticipated.
As one can imagine. I mean, you have tensions that have been buried under the Saddam Hussein regime for decades, and then you have now a situation of open sectarian conflict in which relatives and friends are dying each day. So you can imagine that the tensions are high. Perhaps it's difficult for some policymakers in Washington to understand it because they're not there in Iraq feeling it. And when they are in Iraq, they're in a very protected environment. I think we do have to refocus in Washington and realize we're dealing in not a post-conflict environment, but it is indeed a conflict environment right now. And the task is going to be tremendously difficult.
You've helped to build a government in Kabul, the same in Kosovo. Given a free hand to some extent, what would you suggest now?
I'm not sure I have any good answers. I have to tell you, the good news, let me point that out, is that the Sunni members of parliament are still going to participate, that Mr. Maliki has left the door open to discussion. And whenever there's an open door, there's hope. Perhaps this is a negotiating tactic. After all, September 15th is coming up when General Petraeus has to give his report. And so for Sunni members of parliament, for them, maybe this move makes sense because they can hope to extract some concessions at this moment. But if the conflict continues, and unless the government is put back together, I'm afraid everyone will lose at the end of the day. And so my recipe for how to bridge this divide is simply to let every group realize they have a common interest in making this work. They don't have to like each other, they don't have to love each other, but they're only going to get, and I said this in Afghanistan when I was there to delegates at the Jirga, I said, you know, the nature of a democracy is you're never going to get everything you want, but you always must get what you need, and that would be the basics of your human rights, of your safety, and obviously in Iraq right now, a lot of people don't feel like they have that.
Well, George Bush has thrown his full but conditional support behind the al-Maliki government. Indeed, a short while ago, his spokesman downplaying this latest rift. When we come back, we'll be asking, is American support still of any use in Iraq? Stay with us on Inside Story.